Kurt Angle is one of the greatest wrestlers to ever step foot in the ring. He's got an Olympic gold medal and multiple WWE championships to his name, but Kurt's incredible intensity also extended to his peers in the locker room, where his frustrations with certain wrestlers sometimes boiled over. In today's video, we're taking a look at the wrestlers that Kurt Angle hated working with, both backstage and inside the ring. Tough Enough was a competition to find the next big WWE superstar, and Daniel Puder was one of the standout prospects on the 2004 season. Puder had a background in MMA and was considered something of a tough guy, and on an episode of Smackdown, he seriously made Kurt angry. It was during a segment where Kurt was challenging the Tough Enough contestants when Puder stepped up for his turn. At the time, Kurt was struggling with a neck injury and he was caught off guard by the rookie. Puder trapped him in an armbar and cranked it tight, and the referee had to intervene. For Kurt, this was more than just an embarrassing moment on TV, it was total disrespect. In an interview, he said, "It wasn't supposed to be an ultimate fighting contest. It was a wrestling match, but there was supposed to be a submission. He was a moron. He put his back on the mat, and it wasn't supposed to be a 1, 2, 3 count. It was only supposed to be a 1 count. I was in a very awkward situation. At that point, I couldn't do 5 push-ups. I was in really, really bad shape. My neck was really bad, and Vince asked me to do this. He wanted me to wrestle all of the Tough Enough guys." After the incident, there was reportedly a tense moment backstage where Kurt had to be held back. He just couldn't believe how this kid had disrespected him on television. Kurt made it clear that he wanted nothing more to do with him after this situation. Puder went on to win the entire season of Tough Enough, but in the end, his pro wrestling career amounted to nothing. No doubt that it was this moment on SmackDown that finished his entire WWE career before it even started. Kurt and Eddie Guerrero were two of the most intense and driven athletes to ever step foot in a wrestling ring. Both men were very similar to each other. They were like brothers backstage. But as with any close relationship, they sometimes found that they couldn't stand to be around each other. In 2004, Kurt and Eddie got into an argument after a match, which, in true brotherly fashion, led to them getting into a fight. Eddie tried to take Kurt down, but Kurt reacted by locking him in a front face lock and choking him out. The Big Show ended up stepping in and pulling them off each other. Kurt put this photo up on his Facebook page and explained when it was taken. "Eddie and I had a little scuffle one night. He pushed me, I shoved him, and he tried to double leg me. I got him in the front face lock and I choked him out. That was that day. The thing was, when we went to talk, I went over to him and said, 'Hey, I want to apologise.' He goes, 'I'm not ready to apologise,' and we started going at it again. So Eddie and I were like brothers. We loved each other and we hated each other hard." Apparently, this wasn't the only time that the men got heated with each other, but at the end of the day, it never took long for these brothers to patch things up. Kurt's match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21 is often named as one of the greatest matches in WWE history, but there was real animosity between the men. Shawn returned to WWE in 2002, just as Kurt was cementing his place at the top of the company. The two were kept on separate brands to begin with, so their interactions were minimal. Shawn was on the Raw brand and Kurt was on the SmackDown brand. But when they were finally put together for their WrestleMania match, there was unexpected tension backstage. Shawn cornered Kurt and told him that he wasn't afraid of him and that if things got out of hand in the ring, then he wouldn't back down. Kurt was confused by this, as he'd usually prided himself on being safe and respectful when the bell rang. He couldn't understand where Shawn had got the impression that he was going to go into business for himself. It later turned out that Shawn had come to this conclusion after seeing a segment on TV where Kurt was defending his Olympic gold medals in an open challenge. During this segment, lower card guys would come out and get beaten up by Kurt, and Kurt was being extra rough with them because Vince McMahon had told him to. But at the time, he was very confused by Shawn's comments towards him, and it caused a real atmosphere between them. Ultimately, they had a fantastic match together, but that early attention wasn't ideal for the kind of trust that's needed in a pro wrestling match. Of course, Shawn quickly learned during the match that the rumours weren't true, and that Kurt was one of the safest and most considerate wrestlers that he could possibly work with. The tension between Kurt and Jeff Jarrett wasn't just on a professional level, it was deeply tied to real life events. Kurt and his now ex-wife Karen were married in 1998, but by 2006 their relationship was falling apart. That same year, Kurt joined TNA and Karen joined him as his on-screen manager. Rumours started to get around the locker room that Karen and Jeff Jarrett were having an affair, and that was confirmed when a TNA employee, who remained anonymous, called into the Bubba the Love Sponge radio show. The caller told Bubba that Karen Angle was in a relationship with Jarrett and that she'd moved in with him along with her and Kurt's children. By this time, Karen and Kurt had separated, but Kurt was apparently still really pissed off about the situation. In 2009, Kurt admitted to having cheated on Karen during their separation, which increased the animosity between the three of them even more. But this being wrestling, the whole thing was of course turned into a storyline. That included some uncomfortable segments, like the one where Kurt's kids called Jeff their daddy, and Kurt was forced to walk his ex-wife down the aisle for her on-screen wedding to Jeff. They did end up putting business before their personal issues, and Kurt gave Jeff some of the best matches of his entire career. Things did work out in the end, as everything simmered down and everyone started to come to terms with the situation. Jeff married Karen in real life, and Kurt ended up getting remarried himself. Kurt's rivalry with Samoa Joe is one of the best in TNA history, featuring two of the most incredible talents to ever grace a wrestling ring. But it wasn't exactly the feud that Kurt had hoped for when he first joined the company. When Kurt joined TNA in 2006, he felt that there was a natural story to be told between him and Joe, who was at the height of his undefeated streak at the time. Joe had never looked stronger in his entire career, and Kurt could have basically been his final boss. Angle really wanted to work with Joe, but he thought that rather than rushing into the feud straight away, they could have built it up slowly, developing a long-term story that would have made the eventual match feel more special. But TNA decided to rush into it instead. On his podcast, Kurt said, "Samoa Joe was undefeated. I felt like if I came into the company and started out with someone else, Joe and I could work up to each other in 6 months to a year, really build our program, but they wanted to slingshot this thing and do it really quickly. Unfortunately, I ended Joe's undefeated streak the first pay-per-view I wrestled. It made no sense at all. I just felt like we could have built this up, done a lot more pay-per-view buys if we built it the correct way instead of slingshotting it." For Kurt, it wasn't the idea of working with Joe that he hated, it was the way they rushed into telling the story and having him beat the undefeated streak as soon as he walked into the company. If anything, he was excited to work with Joe, but the feud that he ended up getting instead was incredibly disappointing, both for him and for the fans. Back at the start of 2006, Kurt was dealing with a bunch of personal problems. He had a serious addiction to painkillers and, even worse, mental health issues to go along with it. He was starting to feel like he was trapped in WWE, having to deal with all of those demons and the fact that his body was breaking down. Kurt once had a fantastic relationship with Vince McMahon, but he soon started to resent working for him. He still had lots of time left on his contract when all he really wanted to do was go and get healthy. I wanted to get out of my contract. I told Vince this is something that was really difficult for me to say. I told him, listen, I'm afraid I'm going to kill myself. I didn't mean stab myself in the stomach or shoot myself in the head. I meant I was going to take too many pills and kill myself. And I said, I need to get out of here. You've got to let me go. This was a really suffocating period in Kurt's career. In fact, he's described it as the worst time of his entire life. He even started texting Vince while he was intoxicated. It got so bad that Vince had to call Kurt into his office for an intervention. I was texting Vince while I was taking pills at night. I was texting him because he wouldn't answer the phone when I called. I was threatening him, saying, Vince, I'm going to kick your ass when I see you. I'm going to F you up when I see you. Wait till I see you, Vince. I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Very quickly, Vince realised the kind of emotional turmoil that Kurt was going through at the time and agreed to release him from his contract early. Vince looked at me and asked, you want to kick my ass? Then he got up, took off his jacket, and I thought, oh my god, this guy wants to fight me. I put my head down and realised, I've got to get out of here. I left the room, started crying, and when I came back I said, Vince, listen, I'm sorry, but I've got to get out of here. You've got to let me go. When Kurt came back to WWE a few years later, he'd managed to clean up his life and he was like a new man. He went straight to Vince and apologised. It was a big moment for Kurt. In his 10 years away from WWE, he'd worried about how he'd left his relationship with Vince, but he shouldn't have worried. Vince told Kurt to let it go, telling him that the past was in the past.